There you go. I started. So this is our night for, we talk about supports that are available at college for students with learning differences. And we are lucky today to have Tom Serency, did I pronounce it right? And Casey Wynett from, so Tom is from Curry College, and Casey is from, I'm sorry, Tom is from UMass Lowell, Casey is from Curry College. I got it. And then we have April Zyrek, she's our special education coordinator, and Darby Neff-Veer, who's our guidance department chair. So the way I was envisioning this Zoom session, we hold this night every year, it's usually a panel, is to, sorry, I'm still admitting people, is to talk a little bit just to start things off, and then take your questions in the chat window, and I'll read them, and then we'll let our panel answer the questions. So I'm gonna share a screen and just give a small presentation here. So as you can see, and I'm gonna keep admitting people. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the differences between the high school and college, where the high school is the special education model, where we actually ask to, school personnel tries to find people who have learning differences and decide what eligibility for services and supports. Where in college, it's an accommodation model that the student must request help and no one will come and find them. And that's the biggest difference. We talk a lot about self-advocacy, is that we are trying, in the 4 years at Brookline High or more, we're trying to prepare our students to really self-advocate. And that's where it comes in. Where you receive services, again, this might be special education classroom, resource room, related service provider, for example, speech. In college, it's different from one college to another. It could be Office of Disability Services, Disabled Student Services, or Special Services. So it's really, when students are looking at colleges, they need to research what's the name of the office and if they have support service. High school, and that's one of the bigger questions we always ask. The documentation is coordinated by school, psychologist, or the appointed staff person, and then we develop IP from the documentation test results, and it's paid by the school. Whereas in college, you must provide proof of your disability, high school records, reports, and colleges can set their own guidelines for the documentation. And I'm sure we'll hear from our two colleagues about their guidelines, but usually it's a testing or an IEP. And then high schools are not required to do a comprehensive evaluation for college. So we usually don't evaluate for college. And then after high school, you're responsible for paying for new evaluations. Moving along. The special education law for individuals with disabilities, IDA, provides and mandates funding to schools for in-school special education services, as well as transportation, buses to school, physical, occupational, speech therapy. And the college is really guided by civil rights law. ADA in section 504, college is required only to offer accommodations and support services and not service of a personal nature. And tutoring is not required under ADA, while some colleges offer tutoring through disability services, and some colleges have tutoring center for all students. And foreign language waivers and other course substitution are not automatic. Before I go on, I just want to mention that I did post this entire presentation on our website, which is, if you just Google Brookline High School Guidance, you can download it right now. And I'll give a link in a second. I just don't want to play with the screens right now. but you can follow along. It's already downloadable on Brookline High School Guidance. It's the first entry you'll see. I have about 3 more slides that are really important. So while it's still in high school, you need to talk to your parents, high school special education teacher, guidance counselor to learn about your specific disabilities, understand the academic impact of your disability, or as we like to say, learning difference, understand the areas of strength and weakness, make sure that you have current documentation, read your disability recommendation, understand it, and learn to express your current and future needs, concerns, interests, and preferences. And that again is an important slide about students knowing what their learning difference is, because they have to advocate for themselves in college, and this is the big self-advocacy goal. And then do your homework. Consider what services programs each prospective college provides for their disability support office or other office that handles disability accommodations. How often are services available? Are the service providers on campus and available on as needed basis, and other restrictions? And we always say there are some schools, I always tell students that it might be just a writing center. There are some schools that has a learning disability office, and then there's other schools that have a specific program, like PAL program, where you can start in the summer and they provide a lot more support. So it really depends, and each college is different and each student is different. So it really depends on which college will be more beneficial to you. And then this is the slide that describes it. It's just the slide doesn't have Russian accent like I do. Programs are specifically designed for students with disabilities and provide more in-depth services accommodations. And that not all services have those types, whereas support services are resources available at no cost for students with disabilities. They include reasonable accommodations such as extended time for assignment and testing, note takers, use of a calculator, preferential seating in classrooms. And a lot of our kids have extended time at Brookline High School, and they use it in college as well. And they usually need to find the support services and then give them the IEP or testing. We'll talk about it in a second. So you've been accepted to college now, and this is the slide that talks about it. You need to register with the College Disability Service Officer Program. And remember, you need to contact that campus office. They will not find you. Provide disability documentation that is current and meets college guidelines, and request the accommodations you will need, and then request accommodations before scheduled placement tests, or you will not receive accommodations for these tests. Arrange other supports not provided by school. Do you need things like counseling, medication management, other supports? Who will provide them for you and how they'll affect your schedule? Develop backup plans for those supports. And of course, this slide always reminds me, we do have a lot of students who, it's not just learning disabilities. Sometimes a lot of kids have emotional disabilities, and colleges are well aware of that. And usually colleges have a lot of supports, but it's important to find the one that has support for you. And this is the extent of my presentation. I'm gonna stop the screen share right now. And let me just quickly find just 1 second now. I'll find the Brookline Guidance website where you can find the link, and I'm gonna start the chat here, and then you can go ahead. I wonder if any of our anybody on the panel, Darby or April or Casey or Tom, want to say anything, or I can take questions from parents. And hi everyone, I'm glad to see everybody in this definitely different time.
It might be nice to hear from Tom and Casey about what support services look like, and what the difference between maybe programs and services look like at each of their campuses. if they don't mind.
So I'm happy to go first and start it off. Again, my name is Tom Scranchi. I work with University of Massachusetts Lowell, UMass Lowell. I'm one of the schools, so I can talk a little bit about that kind of perspective. In terms of our services, Lenny, what you put in your presentation is perfect. We do, reach out. We may reach out to students who have maybe indicated they have a learning difference or an IEP or something like that. But for the vast majority of the time, it is self-advocacy is a very big thing in terms of finding the services and getting them, whether they be based on learning or emotion or physical, temporary or permanent. So it's important for students to definitely know what you said in terms of self-advocacy is a very big thing. There are a lot of accommodations through the school, but again, like you said, no one's going to hunt you down and make you get these services. No one's going to say, hey, you should get extended testing time. It could benefit you. It really comes down to you saying, oh, I've had extended testing time in the past and it's been very beneficial. I would like to keep that going. And that's a very common service for us to do. So it is definitely much more of an accommodation service versus a program. They do offer certain programs. The office, which is aptly named the Office of Disability Services, will do different programs, but it is primarily a accommodation-based program based around classes and note-taking and test-taking and all that kind of stuff. But again, reiterating, it is definitely all about self-advocacy for sure.
We're big on self-advocacy too. Definitely something that we kind of preach throughout the application process. And when you do finally make that decision to enroll at the at Curry College, my name's Casey. If you missed that, I'm one of the admission counselors for Curry. I don't specifically work with students applying to our disabilities program. The counselor that does is actually out on maternity leave right now, but I'm pretty knowledgeable in what they're able to offer. So I'll do my best to answer any questions that you have. But at Curry, we do have various levels of support for students of all different needs. We have our PAL program, which is referred to as the Program for Advancement of Learning, and this is for students with various language-based learning differences, ADHD, dyslexia, any executive functioning challenges, and this is our most hands-on program. So these students get about 2 hours of personalized attention a week, so it is really specific to their needs and their learning difference. There's a separate application process for this. They need to submit diagnostic cognitive and achievement testing. They get reviewed by both admission and PAL to make sure they're a good fit for both. And then we do have that Office of Disability Services that can provide services like extra exam time or note-taking services or preferential seating like was in the slideshow. And then we have a separate tutoring center as well. So if you're in PAL, all three of these things really work well together. If you don't need specific support to the extent of PAL, Office of Disability Services could be a great option for you. But we'll work with you to help you connect with these offices to really make sure you're signing up for what's best for you.
Thank you. And we have the first question is, how would you go about beginning to find and learn about colleges for learning differences? Darby, do you want to take that one, or do you want me to speak to?
As a counselor working with high school students for 23 years, I think part of the key component for the student comes back to a lot of what Lenny said around, it's really key that the student themselves understands how to speak to their learning differences and what they feel is the most appropriate accommodations and or services that have helped them at the high school level that they want to advocate for when they go to college. And I think some key things, most of us counselors who've been doing this for a while are pretty savvy about understanding some of the different programs and schools that highlight these kinds of supports. But one of the key books that I use a lot is this book. It's called The K&W Guide to Colleges for Students with Learning Differences. It comes out every couple of years, and it's updated with pretty clear ideas of schools across the country and what levels and what types of support they offer at those levels. I think it's fair to say that pretty much any college or university will offer different kinds of help centers on campus for any student. And that is for a student who is not necessarily a student in the high school that has an IEP, a 504, even an ICAP at Brookline High. These are help centers that are available to any student. And we find some students have either kind of built their strategies and know what they need, and or have made a lot of progress over time in kind of putting together a plan that helps them to kind of take on studying. But that sometimes some students don't necessarily need the direct support of the Office of Student Services on a college campus. They're able to do really well just using the help centers that are available to any student. Other students, and I'd say for most students who have an IEP, certainly, and I strongly suggest 504, even ICAP, that they actually go to the Office of Student Support Services before they start school to really have a conversation and bring documents so that they can sort out what they may need. It's better to have that in place around accommodations and support before school starts or before the first mid-year exams happen than to be scrambling at the last minute and saying, oh my gosh, I never did this. I really do think I need this. And then kind of being, raising the anxiety level many notches. So I think looking at colleges right now, as we all know, college campuses are not open for information sessions and tours. But a lot of, I think pretty much all colleges and universities are doing some variation of virtual information sessions and tours. I'd be interested to hear from Tom and Casey about if there's anything specific to the student support offices that students could look up online. But whether it's virtual or in person, as students are starting to put together their lists of schools, I think it's key to be reaching out and finding out what is available at these campuses that they're interested in, above and beyond the important and key components of the academic programs a college offers, the community, the best fit. So I'll just kind of stop there and let other people chime in.
Yeah, your high school counselors are definitely a great resource for this. Like you mentioned, they've been doing this for a while, so they kind of know what schools they can refer you to. Several lists get put out by magazines and college books and everything. Always a great Google search can help with that. But your counselors are probably the best resource for you because you know them. It's a face-to-face interaction. They can totally help you out with that. We are doing general information sessions online, so you can check that out. We have a virtual tour up, and then our staff and faculty members are always willing to have a personal conversation with you. So if you wanted to talk with one of our PAL advisors, I could give you their email address, or you could reach out to the admission office and we can get you in touch with them. Or if you wanted to talk specifically to the Office of Disability Services or someone that works in our tutoring center, we're always willing to have someone reach out to you and have that personal conversation.
And the next question is always hard to answer. The other colleges that are specifically well known for supporting students and IEPs for learning disability. And the reason behind it is what I find is there's so many different disabilities, so many different colleges that it really is important to talk to your guidance counselor, as Casey mentioned, to find the right fit for the student. But just talking, I really like to, I always recommend starting with Curry, starting with the UMass Lowell, and then looking at Westfield State, which is a great state school. But there's so many colleges. As Darby said, the best way to start is, and I put the link to a K&W Guide to Colleges for Students on the chat. That's if you just enter that link, that name into Amazon, you'll see the book. That's a good starting place, as well as Naviance, where you can look at where our kids go. Anybody else want to chime in?
So there are definitely schools that specialize in servicing students with learning differences. Some of those schools are specific to certain differences, whether it be dyslexia or what have you. But every school is going to have, obviously, a disability services office or some shape or form in terms of accommodations. So if going into that avenue and not going into what I'll call it a specialty school, then I think it comes down to, obviously, the location, the size of the school, and what accommodations you're hoping to have. So a lot of schools are going to have a lot of the same accommodations, whether it be preferred seating or private testing areas or stuff like that. But it's definitely a great idea to look into schools you're interested in and see what their support systems are, and if they're not adequate, seeing if they can meet you all the way, not just halfway, or if it's time to look to a different school. But there are definitely schools that specialize in it, just to reiterate, but definitely look at each school to see what we all offer in terms of specific accommodations that you might be looking for exactly.
I have next question as, so just for people who just joining us, if you have any questions, just put them in the chat and then we'll read them. Many schools are waiving SATs, however, not all are. How limiting is it for a student to not take SATs? And I'll start with this because this is an unusual year where a lot of the standardized tests have been canceled because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So the website we refer all the students to is fairtest.org. I'll type it in a second, where you can see a complete list of schools that are test optional. So I think this is a particular year where it would not be limiting for a student to not take SATs. I think, I don't know if there will be SATs offered in the summer. There might be some in the fall. In fact, as nobody knows. But I don't think it will be limiting. But I'll let Tom and Casey also jump in because they've been dealing with this for a while, even before the COVID. You want to start?
Yep.
So we waived SATs, I think next year will be our third year reviewing applications without SATs. So we've waived them for everything except nursing and education. We're even looking towards waiving them for education. And if you do apply to our program for advancement of learning for students with language differences, various language-based learning differences, we don't require them for education. We will always require them for nursing, but we always did a holistic review of the applicants, so SATs were never really the one deciding factor of an applicant. So I can't speak for other schools, but at Curry, unless they're looking at nursing, we won't, disqualify someone for SATs. We won't require them. If you want to send them in, that's great. If you send them in and you're worried about the score, it's never going to hurt your application.
Yeah, so for UMass Lowell, we've been test optional for a couple of years now. So every student has that option to not ever have to take the SATs or submit them. So we do offer language waivers. So if a student's applying on it with an IEP or a 504, or just declaring they have a learning difference, foreign languages from the high school can be waived, so those aren't required. So it does give you some wiggle room in terms of that. But it is a flexibility is the name of the game right now, and schools have to adapt to what the situation entails. And one of the things is, since we do accept, of course, SAT scores, the merit-based scholarships that are awarded that are based on grades are obviously going to be adapted in the fall. So that actually works out a lot in a big favor for students not applying to the SATs, because they'll actually get probably an increased chance of getting a scholarship. So we as schools are adapting to see what we can do to best serve students. But definitely a lot of schools are applying test optional. Looking at the test optional avenue is definitely something students can definitely do. And yeah, I recommend it.
And another question that I know came up in previous panels we've done over the years is that a lot of our Massachusetts state schools would waive the SAT or ACT if you provide, if you have a testing or an IEP that shows you have a learning disability. So in the past years, we've had a lot of kids applying with a waiver for SATs. And actually UMass Amherst on their application, it does ask, would you like to waive your SAT requirement because you have a learning disability? So a student can check yes or no, and then submit their testing and their IEP to the office, and they'll waive that requirement. Again, this is a different year where there's so many schools that are going to waive that anyway. But this has always been a great option for our Massachusetts state schools, is to completely waive this requirement. And that usually brings another question. Darby, did you want to say something?
I just wanted to mention that we've mentioned this in a number of different emails and other ways of communicating out to students and families over particularly the past couple of months. But NACAC, it's called nacacnet.org, which is the National Association of Admissions Counselors, and us high school counselors are very much a part of that as well. They have an ongoing fluid list of colleges and list by college and what they're offering now as far as virtual information sessions and tours, but also where they stand as far as the standardized testing piece. So it's a valuable, easy to access tool, which Lenny, I don't know, maybe you could put that link up on the chat as well.
I'll try to find it.
Yeah, and it's a good resource. I think one of the key pieces, not all colleges and universities are going test optional, but there's been a huge tidal wave of, I mean, there's been a gradual shifting of a lot of schools considering going test optional. And then there was a tidal wave after the changes to college admissions testing over the last few months and moving forward. It's to be determined if this will be a short-term impact or it will be a long-term impact around colleges deciding to remain test optional. But certainly for current juniors and seniors in high school, the test optional piece is going to be much more prevalent even than it was before. And I would say, I think the only area where I think it gets a little fuzzy, even though a school is test optional, sometimes for scholarships, a college or university will want a student to have taken the SAT or the ACT to be eligible for certain scholarships available at their college or university. So that's where things get a little muddy at times, and it's important to search out supports like counselor, like Lenny Libinson at BHS, who does the college counseling piece, and even more so going directly to a school's website to find out what that looks like. April, I saw you shaking your head. Did you have any, you're just agreeing, or do you have anything you want to add?
I was just agreeing that we're entering a new time, and who knows how this is all going to roll out regarding test requirements. And yeah, I just think that we're entering, I love the idea of virtual tours at this point as you're kind of just exploring options. Yeah, I think we're entering a new phase.
I got an email from a lot of us got an email from the University of California system, and I loved it because they are developing a 5-year plan. And as a person from former Soviet Union, nothing is better than to see somebody is using the 5-year plan expression. But they are planning to stay test optional for, I think, another 5 years. So yeah, it's new time, and I don't know how it's gonna go, but I think I don't think this coming year the SAT not taking a standardized test will be limiting. We have several more questions, so I'll just continue going. The next question is, can a parent still be involved in assisting their student once in college to get support?
So I'll jump in. Parents can definitely be involved. However, it is the student's education and their time in college, so they really have to be obviously part of it as well. You can't just steamroll in part of my expression and tell them what you want to happen. If the student is involved, if your daughter or whoever is involved in the process, you can definitely be involved. But the student, obviously, it's their education, it's their plan, it's their degree. So as long as they are part of it and present and agree to the terms or whatever, you can definitely be involved. But just note that.
And it definitely comes back to being a strong self-advocate. We try to encourage the student to do as much as the legwork as they can. We have the option for the parents to be on their own My Curry portal is what we call it. So there's a parent portal. The student has to grant you permission to see things like their class schedule and their grades, but that's a way you can still be involved. But we do encourage the student to be doing most of the work, but hopefully you, your student, and the professors all have that good kind of line of communication where you'll still be kept in the loop with everything.
And I want to mention one of the biggest concerns I've heard over many, many years doing this is parents call me back and they're like, oh, the college wouldn't report the grades to us. And that's hard for a lot of our parents, as the colleges technically need the student, because the student is considered an adult, and they need the student's permission to report the grades to parents. So majority of parents don't, they pay tuition, room and board, but they don't hear about the grades. So that could be a really difficult thing for a lot of our parents. But yeah. I have another question. What do colleges like Curry and Lowell that you mentioned offer to encourage you to highlight them? I'm not sure where it's referring to. So we'll move. If whoever wrote that question, if you can retype it, we'll answer it. The next question: if the students are not required to take SATs, what does the qualify for colleges to admit the student?
For us, we, without the SATs, we'll have to take a heavier look at the high school transcript, but we definitely do a holistic review of the applicant. So the average GPAs that we see come in really between like a 2.7 and a 3.5. And we see everything higher and everything lower as well. But we take into consideration, upward progression in grades. So maybe freshman year was a little rough, but senior year is going really well. And it was kind of like the middle ground, junior and sophomore year. So we love to see that upward progression in grades, great recommendation letters, heavy involvement. So maybe you're got a part-time job, or you've been in a club, or you have a special talent, or you play sports. We'll look in that involvement level too when we're making a decision. Your demonstrated interest in Curry College too, we track that. So if you chat with your admission counselor, if you come and visit campus, if that's possible, if you come to a virtual session, if we're still doing virtual sessions, we'll track all of that and really make sure you're interested in Curry, and we'll do our best to kind of meet you there.
I think what Casey said hit the nail on the head perfectly. UMass Lowell is very, very similar in terms of our review process. We definitely look at the transcript as a whole picture and look at all those other factors that she mentioned. So it's definitely dead on with her answer. UMass Lowell, for us personally, has kind of always leaned more towards the GPA as being having a little more weight than the SAT, being that standardized tests are standardized tests. But we'll definitely use them if students want to submit them. But if not, it's going to be the class you take, the level of the courses, how you did over those whole 4 years, Casey mentioned. So this is another time where your personal essay, your letter recommendation can really highlight you as an individual. And I personally like to read those essays because it can be very interesting. And the letter recommendation can be really highlighting an outside perspective as you as a student and your development or your interests. We have plenty of factors outside of the SATs on how to learn about a student. So it's not like if you don't have the SATs, then, well, you're basically, screwed. There's a lot that we can obviously work with to evaluate a student, and that's always good to know too. Yeah.
Something else I kind of want to mention, about the holistic review of the applicant is we understand from the admission side point that sometimes things happen. Right now, there's a huge thing happening where you've had to transition to online learning and you weren't expecting that. We'll understand that when we're reviewing your application. If, you had a family tragedy during high school and sophomore year, your grades plummeted, but everything else is great. We want you to let us know why you had, kind of a dip in your grades, or if something was going on outside of school. You can write that in your essay or the additional comment section of the application, and we'll take that into consideration. We understand that life happens outside of school too, so just be as transparent with us as you can.
I think that's definitely something that will grab the attention of a counselor, is if you have all A's and B's and then your sophomore year is all C's and D's, most of us are going to stop and go, well, what happened that year? Let me look at the letter recommendation or counselor recommendation or what have you to see what's been going on. So definitely what Casey said, I definitely support it, yeah.
I just wanted to add for parents and students that you're going to hear this phrase holistic review as far as the application process over and over again. And actually you're going to hear even more of that at all different types of colleges now that we've moved into this COVID time, because a lot of schools are doing the test optional. The transcript has the high school transcript, which at Brookline High includes final grades from 9th grade, final grades from 10th grade, final grades from 11th grade, and then most of the time, as seniors probably know who are on this panel event, that we do send out first report cards for either first or transcripts with first term and or second term grades on them. So that has always been and will continue to be the most important piece of information that is taken into account around the words holistic application. What is becoming more priority around holistic, and as we move into applications during this COVID time, are the recommendations, the student's application, the essay, the resume, or what that student has been involved with. And it doesn't have to be specifically school related. We have a lot of students who are really passionate about things that they do outside of school or a job that they have. And it's really important to note that college admissions, and I turn to Tom and Casey again, but you don't have to be the president of a club at the high school to be able to show real passion and excitement about something. And we use the word passion, but it's just dedication, and it doesn't have to be also a multiple number of different activities. It could be just one or two where you've shown a real commitment over a number of years to wanting to get better at a certain skill level, or you've done babysitting since you were in 9th grade and you love kids, and you're making money doing that. These are all very viable activities that college admissions people will look at. It doesn't have to be the fancy stuff. I don't know if Tom or Casey wants to speak to that, but I just wanted to throw that in too.
No, I love that. Yep, definitely. I would love to emphasize that how important that is. Some students have a lot of family responsibilities and they can't work. They have to babysit, or they have to just work to help make ends meet, and they can't be in 5-10 different clubs. So every student's application is going to be unique, and we approach them all with a clean slate. It's a mental break between applications to get to reset. So definitely approach it with that in mind, that you don't have to have 30 activities. Just showing that your growth, your interest in your education and your self-development are the most important things to get across to us. So yeah, that's it.
And I always talk, it's my hobby horse, I always talk about finding, when you're looking for college, a college that you can afford. We talk about having a financial safety on your list. And it'll be huge next year, as if you follow any New York Times or any other newspaper talking about colleges, the projections, they'll lose a lot of the students from overseas. A lot of international students who used to pay full tuition are probably not coming in. So I think colleges will look at the students' financial situation as well. And I wonder if they'll give more scholarships or if they'll admit more students who can pay. I don't know, but we always recommend as a department, and every student I see, I say, add the financial safety where you know you can afford the college or you can get a scholarship. All right, so there's a quick question. If there's any reason to suggest that not submitting your SATs put you at a disadvantage in terms of admission. And again, this is a tough question to answer, because this is you need to sit down with a student and see what their SATs are and where they're applying. When I'm talking to a lot of college representatives, sometimes a student is not submitting a score, and then I talk to the college rep and they're like, no, it was this score, actually you would get a scholarship, it's a great score. Other times they say, no, please don't submit the score, because then the student is actually looks better to us without the SAT. My own son likes to play computer games, so his grades are not that great, but he did really well on SAT, so it'll be advantageous for him to submit it, I hope. But I don't know if we have some battles over this quarantine about computer time. I hope none of you do. I don't know if Tom and Casey want to jump in here.
So this could be a school by school thing. You know, certain schools, SATs are required for certain programs. And depending on your GPA and SAT, it might be more advantageous to apply with the SATs versus without. So this can definitely, unfortunately, be a school by school thing where you have to go and look into all 5, 10, God forbid, schools you're looking into and see what each of those schools is doing in terms of SATs. But it's definitely a school by school thing, unfortunately. So there's that to know as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Everyone's going to be different with this. For us, for example, we don't have scholarships specific towards SATs, so a student's not going to be hindered at all by not submitting them. If you do have the lower GPA and higher SAT scores, that could be a good bonus for you, kind of. But even if you submit SATs that aren't really that great, if you've got the kind of GPA and extracurricular and holistic person that we're looking for, bad SAT scores aren't going to hinder your application with us. But definitely quick email to your counselor at every school you apply to, and we'll be able to tell you what we're really looking for with SATs or what we're not looking for.
My next question is, do you know of any gap year programs that allow students to develop and strengthen their independent skills and empower them with the tools to build social confidence? And how can parents find out more about these programs? Again, I'll jump in because I'm responsible for the gap year programming at Brookline High School. We do have a gap year fair taking place every January. We had one this past year. There were about 60 programs, and that's a great place to start. We also, I just scheduled it for next year with Gap Years USA, and I have a bunch of links I can recommend. I just attended last week was the webinar was the Gap Year consultant, and she's excellent. And she didn't know much about Gap Year programs either, because we don't know how it's going to look next year. A lot of the Gap Year programs are based on going overseas. We don't know if they'll run. The programs we love, like City Year, AmeriCourse, where students can teach and actually get paid to be in them, I hope they will run. But at this point, it's just hard to advise because I just don't know what's going to happen. So I hope a lot of your, if you're parents of juniors or sophomores, you can come to my Gap Year Fair if we have it next January and start there. I don't know if Darby or April, you want to jump in? I'll post them.
Yeah, April, go ahead.
I didn't know there was a gap year fair. That sounds exciting, Lenny. I'll have to come. I'll make sure it's on my calendar because I don't know enough about it. And I think it's a great option for a lot of students to take a breath, take a moment, work on some skills, and also get clarity about what they'd like to pursue as a next step. So I'd like to find out more about it too. So thank you. Keep us posted.
I'll post a couple of links. One of my favorite search engines is actually developed by a Brookline parent, and it's teenlife.org. And then the other interesting website that I learned about that talks about online learning communities and online volunteering that might be helpful. It's called Om Prakash.
While Lenny's doing that, I'll just dive in. I saw in a chat response or later, just a few parts down, another parent recommended Carpe Diem, which is a gap year program. You pay a consultant to help match you with different kinds of programs. I think overall, I've been a strong believer in gap year programs before gap year was really a thing, because I've been doing this a really long time. I think there's a lot of students that feel like they just can't think about taking a year off from college because it just wasn't the thing to do. It's now become much more of a thing. And now with COVID, I think it's not only just a thing, but people, parents, students are really thinking about, well, do I want to pay all sorts of money next year to go off to college when I might be actually still doing remote learning from home? And so gap years is starting to become even more of a kind of a viable issue. I think any student, whether it's a student who has different kinds of life or learning challenges, can benefit hugely from the idea of gap year. And a gap year program can be a program per se of traveling or being connected to a very structured program. Those will cost some money most of the time. But there's also gap year opportunities that are a lot less expensive to the point where even a student and parent can put together something themselves. I think it's hard for experts in gap year, let alone us, like Lenny said, to really know what gap year options to really highlight right now, because if travel is limited, if we just don't know yet based on the pandemic that we're all dealing with right now. But gap year itself is an incredible opportunity for young people to gain self-confidence, gain advocacy skills, and gain real independence and trusting themselves to go off to college the year after and be very successful.
I just finished a book about a pandemic called The End of October. And the guy it's a spoiler alert, but the guy saves himself by going on a submarine and saves his family while the world is dying from the pandemic. But there's a gap year program that I wish I went to when I was 18. It's called Semester, or Semester at Sea, and you sail on a boat from Australia to India and get 3 college credits for marine biology, and it's relatively cheap because you're on a boat. The key is I don't know if it will run, but potentially you could be saved. It could be that. It could be the only boat that. Anyway, I don't recommend that book. It's really scary to read right now. I have another great question here. I've been concerned about college workloads. How have BHS students with disabilities fared with increased workloads? I find that a lot of students come back and actually say college could be easier, or that BHS prepared them really well for college. I have not really had a student come back and say it's too hard. At the same time, our students do transfer if they don't like something about college. A lot of colleges nowadays look for freshmen who did well in college first year. That doing first year in any college is huge. So it's really easy to transfer if you did well first year. So we have a bunch of students who transfer, and then I've never had anybody come in and say, wow, this college is so much harder. Part of it is because in college, you only usually take 4 classes, and each class is about 3 hours a week, and it's only 12 hours of being in classroom. The rest of the time you have free. Well, 12 hours in the classroom is only a couple of days before COVID quarantine. So it is easier. It's more manageable for our students. I don't know if anybody else in the panel want to take.
I always like to highlight that too when this question gets brought up, is that in high school you're, in your school from 7:30 to 2-3 o'clock in the day. The college isn't going to be like that. You might be in class from 9 to noon and then have a lab at 3 o'clock, or have an entire free afternoon. So there's definitely more time. It's just having strong time management skills is crucial, so to get your work done in that free time instead of playing video games or hanging out with your friends during all those free hours. And if time management is something that you struggle with and you do happen to be in the PAL program, that's something that they can help you out with. But you definitely have kind of a little bit more time to get that work done.
Yeah, I'll just chime in and say in my many years of supporting high school students through high school and then them going off to college and then coming back, whether they're students with diagnosed learning differences or not. The very common feedback is high school was so much harder than college. Certainly it depends on the type of college and university a student goes off to, but it's, I think a different way to think about it is the workload is not necessarily harder, it's just working differently. And I think that speaks to the time management piece, just the way the days are structured, it's just very different. And it's important for students to recognize that and not get too anxious about that. I was listening to a webinar last night that had a couple of, about 4 or 5 students that are currently in college at actually some fairly selective schools. And the last question that was asked of this panel was, what do you wish you would have known when you were still in high school, particularly junior, senior year, that you know now? And every single one of them said, I wish I would have just chilled out a little bit more because it's going to be okay. So I just feel like I'd love for us here at Brookline High to be able to put together a panel like that, particularly right now, because I think students could really benefit from some reassurance in those kinds of ways.
And one of the parents did mention the Carpe Diem program, as Darby said, and I heard great things about it as well. They come to our Gap Year Fair, and we always have a line of kids. Another question is, you have Kari and Lowell in this panel, is that because students with disabilities have found great success there because their disability services have good reputations? And I would definitely say yes for both.
Yes, that is why we specifically reached out to them. They have great programs, great supports, great people, and they are not the only ones, but we just felt like they had great resources that would be helpful to share with all of you.
I don't have any other questions. I don't know if anybody else wants to say anything, jump in.
April, can I ask you a question?
Yes, and I was going to say something. Sure.
Okay, so maybe we're on the same page here. I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit from the special education support end about what kind of strategies and work typically happens to support juniors and seniors in particular as they're moving on to post-high school options like college. Are there conversations like, let's look at your IEP together, let's look at your testing together, let's talk, how can I help you find the words to understand and be able to articulate your learning differences when you go and speak to somebody that's not somebody you even know. Maybe a little bit about the transition program also at BHS. People here probably are very familiar, but just to kind of speak to those things.
So for students on IEPs, part of the IEP process is developing a transition planning form, and that typically can start at the beginning of the meeting, or sometimes you wrap up the meeting, which is really around what are the future goals. And that form helps inform the team, student, parent, families, and school personnel on what is it that we want to see in the future and how can we get you prepared. The question about workload and level of independence, question about time management, if those are skills you need to be working on, we need to be working on them earlier than when you arrive to Curry College with our friend Cassie up there or with Tom up in Lowell. So really the transition planning form, we want to get clarity about, and that's some of the self-assessment that you do, typically students do with their liaisons or learning center teachers, really getting clear about what is it that I'm going to need to practice now so that I can bring that to my next place. That's a really helpful guide through the IEP process to help students, families, and teams figure out. Also opportunities. Do I need to have more volunteer opportunities? Should I be exposed more in the community? Where am I going to practice some skills? How am I going to work on these skills? So that's also a piece of that. I wanted to also talk about helping your student think about becoming more and more independent as the school years go on in high school. And we see that in regards to IEP services and also the kinds of support students need as incoming freshmen are different when they're seniors. But really working with your teams and thinking about, okay, should we stretch and take a different kind of level course? Or should we stretch and take an elective that maybe would be more challenging? Or should we think about cutting back on the frequency of learning center? Or something where we're starting to build more independence on students being able to navigate their own workload or to navigate all of the pieces, some of the executive functioning pieces that Dobby spoke of earlier. So those are places I would encourage families to start working with their special ed liaison around. Good.
Thank you, April. So I think I'll stop recording at this point and